argument, discussing it from beginning to end. So let's clear this off. So what we have in front of us is an argument in a single sentence. It's a little grammatically weird, but let's look at it. And maybe you don't think my logic tracks, but we're going to pretend that it does. Let's say I say to you, I know you didn't cheat on your midterm because if you had, you would not have done very well, and you did do very well. What we have here is an argument, but it can be difficult to recognize that it's an argument. This looks like something we might find in our textbooks under the fallacies section, except this is not actually a fallacious bit of reasoning. It is structurally sound. I can tell that by looking at it. Maybe you can tell it is structurally valid, actually, I should have said. Sorry, guys. Just by looking at it as well. Maybe you can't so much, but these can get very lengthy. Arguments can be several sentences long. They can be paragraphs long. They could probably be books long. Although they'd probably have some superfluous bits in them if they were that long. But arguments can get quite lengthy, and it can be easy to lose the thread. So maybe you can just look at this and tell that it is structurally valid, and maybe you cannot. So we've been talking about validity since the second day of class, after syllabus day. And we should by now know the definition of validity. It means that if all the premises are true, the conclusion must be true as well. I want you guys to take note that I'm actually making a conditional claim. I'm saying if the premises are true, then the conclusion must also be true as well. So I want you to visualize that truth table, or maybe pause this and look at your notes and check that out. Check out what that claim actually means. So validity, again, is if all of the premises are true, the conclusion cannot be false. If the premises are all true and the conclusion is false, you have an invalid argument. So let's look at what this looks like. Let's do it step by step. So the first thing we want to do is maybe get some numbered premises. That's what you guys are used to having. So, oh, mercy. I don't know why it keeps having a Latin sentence in there. Okay, so let's get some numbered premises on here. Okay, that should give me enough space. All right, so what are we looking at here? I know you didn't cheat on your midterm, because if you had, you would not have done very well. Well, I see a conditional here. I don't think that, well, let's talk about this in some maybe different terms. I see some ands in here. I see an if in here. But I don't really, I don't know that this and is working as a connective. It doesn't look like it's two parts of the same claim. It just looks like it's an and. So I'm not going to worry about that guy for now, but I do see an if, because if you had, you would not have done very well. This is kind of backwards, and it's not a straightforward if-then statement, but we can say that this is creating some kind of rule that says something like, if you cheat on your midterm, then you will not do very well. Right? If you had, you would not have done very well. Okay, that I know you didn't cheat on your midterm because if you had, you would not have done very well. Can be parsed as, we can understand it as a kind of rule about the world. If you cheat on your midterm, then you will not do well. So let's look at what our second premise might be. All right. It seems that you did do very well is a claim all on its own. So you did very well on your midterm. Okay. That seems to be what that's claiming. And we'll go through this again. And then for a conclusion, which I'm going to continue to indicate with a C and a parentheses because the 3 dots are a pain to work with. So the conclusion is, what do you guys think about it? What's left? You did not cheat on your midterm. So let's break this down bit by bit and explain why exactly I got this sentence or this argument out of here and how that happened. I kind of started hinting at this at first. What we want to do first is look for claims, right? I know you didn't cheat on your midterm because if you had, you would not have done very well. All right, that seems very obviously to be an if-then statement, right? It's not in that obvious structure, but it's pretty clear what's going on there. We look at this and we realize that this is just a grammatical and, so we're not going to worry about it. Why is it a grammatical and? Well, the comma is a strong indication. And if we really wanted to write this in one line with a conjunction, the little ampersand guy, or that guy, we could write it that way. But it's going to be easier just not to worry about that that and there and recognize it as predominantly grammatical. So we're not going to fuss about him. If you want to fuss about him, you can. It's going to make it more difficult, though. And we know it's an argument, so what could our possible conclusion be? Well, actually, let's see that you did do very well is also now its own premise, right? So we have premise 1, which I forgot to capitalize, sorry. We have premise 2, and we've just identified them in this sentence. And then what does that leave for the conclusion? Well, it seems that this is the obvious conclusion of this sentence. What else could it be? Right? We talked about what premises do in good arguments. They give reasons for the conclusion. This because indicates to me that I'm being given a reason for a conclusion. Right? That's what because means. I love chocolate chip cookies because I think chocolate is delicious. I've given you my reason for loving chocolate chip cookies. Right? That's just how because functions in sentences. So that's a strong indication that we're looking at a premise, and a strong indication that the thing that comes before it is a conclusion. Sorry about that. Okay, so we've broken the sentence down into its logical form. Now our next step is into what you guys are familiar with, right? Numbered premises and conclusion. Now we want to turn it, let's do like phase 3. That's janky. Phase 3, let's turn it into symbolic claims, which was your homework this week. So number 1 is just going to be, it's an if P then Q. Let's say our sentence, Adam, is, you cheat on your midterm. So all of this is going to be symbolized by the uppercase letter M. I'm just making a key up here because it's easier and I don't want to have to write one out in the corner. And let's recognize that we have the second part of the sentence. You will not do very well. So let's symbolize this with a W. Now some of you might be noticing there's a not in here. We can make, and only one L in this will. Sorry. Okay, sorry about my typo. All right. What do we do with this negation? Well, we can include it now by adding the tilde, right? But then we have the second claim, you did very well on your midterm, which is the opposite of this, right? So I'm actually going to go ahead and let the W represents the full sentence, you will not do well on your midterm, or you will not do very well. So we're going to come down here to premise number 2 and see that you did very well on your midterm. So again, this is an opposite. So I want to put my negation in here. You can put it up here if you want. Just the important thing is to recognize that these are opposites of each other. They cannot coexist. They can't both be true at the same time. Either you do very well or you do not do very well. We're assuming it's binary. Maybe very well is 100. But recognize these are different to each other, and whatever you choose to represent the consequent in your first premise, you need to make sure it's either in line with the second premise or that you account for the fact that it's its opposite. So we're going to symbolize that with a negation of you will not do very well, which is to say you will not do very well, which is the same as you do very well. That sounds crazy. And our conclusion is you did not cheat on your midterm, which is just, why did I do that? We can see that we already have M up here. So we conclude from this not M, because again, this is if you cheat on your midterm, and this is if you do not cheat on your midterm. So keep an eye on these guys, decide what to do with them, and then stick with it. Because up here, cheat on your midterm was symbolized by M, not cheating on your midterm needs to be symbolized by not M. Okay, so this is actually a very famous argument form. It's called modus tollens. Sometimes we just label it MT. It has a sister called modus ponens. I will provide links to more information on this, and we will go over so many of these classic argument forms that you'll be sick of them and able to do them in your head by the time we're done. But I'm looking at this and I'm recognizing modus tollens. That's why I did the negations and the symbolizations that I did. Because when we write this in logical form, our first premise is going to be if M, then W. Our second premise we're going to symbolize, just as we underlined up there, with not W. And our conclusion is going to be symbolized as not M. So what do we do with this? All right, we've got an argument. We have symbolized it. Well, this is where truth tables come in. And I'm going to pause this briefly to give us some space to make a truth table in, because my handwriting seems to be getting worse and worse as time goes by. Okay, I have decided to use a different colored pen for this, just so we can keep it separate, because it's very hard to keep all this on screen at once. If you guys find using different colored pens helpful, you can totally do that when you turn in your homework, which we'll talk about how you're going to do. I'll provide instructions in the assignment. But if you want to use different colored pens, or you're using, I don't know, Microsoft Paint, and you want to use different colors, that is totally fine. It can help us keep things separate and organized. So I might change colors throughout this. Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to count the number of variables we have. We have an M and we have a W. We've got some connectives, but those don't change. So we know that it is the number of variables to the power of 2. We only have 2 variables, so we're going to start out our truth table with an M and a W. Then we're going to do our squiggly line to separate our possible worlds from our analysis of the argument. Okay, so first things first. Let me find out where my cursor is. We're going to put our first argument, or our first claim, in our truth table. If M, then W. And then we're just going to put a comma here. Now I'm going to change colors. Maybe we just like put a star next to it. I'm going to change colors just so this is a little easier for you guys to see. So our second claim, I'm going to write in purple right next to it, not W. And maybe I want to give us a little dashed line between them to help us keep things straight. Okay, and then we're going to write our conclusion on the same line horizontally right here. So let's make that a nice dark green. Okay, and our conclusion is therefore not M. All we've done is taken this argument that you're familiar with, which has the 1, 2 conclusion form, we've symbolized it, and then we've just lined those up in a row, right? This looks different, but it's the same thing we've been doing all semester. I told you guys that I was writing them in this numbered form so that it would be familiar when it came time to start doing logic, and now it's paying off. Now is that time. So I'm gonna also move over here and give us a little dotted line. And actually, I messed that up. We should do a little conclusion symbol right here. I got too excited about colors. All right, Photoshop. I clearly do not know how to use you very well. Okay, so we've got our truth table laid out. We've got our argument laid out. Now we need to start creating our possible worlds. So I think I should probably move back to the color black for this. Or maybe we can do, well, I don't want to do red because that kind of implies like not this. Okay. So let me find my cursor. Where on earth are you, cursor? Oh, there you are. All right. Oh, that was not what I wanted. Okay. So let's create our possible worlds. As we know, with 2 variable arguments, we only have 4 possible worlds, so we can just go ahead and true, true, false, false, and then alternate for the second letter, beginning with true, then false, and then true, and then false. Again, all we're doing here is creating all the possible ways these things could be. And again, for ease of discussion, I'm just going to number these so we can talk about them as different worlds. So let's analyze these one by one. If M, then W. We can refer to our truth tables, though I hope you won't use them as a crutch and you will start to memorize them. You will need to know them for the final exam. We've got if M, then W. M happens and W happens, we know that that is true. M happens and W does not happen, we know that that is false. M does not happen, but W does happen. Remember, this is the scenario in which I don't throw the party, but I eat my lonely snacks to myself. I haven't lied, so we know that that one is true. And then for our final line, where neither occur, well, it's a conditional statement, so we know that no lie has been told. That's true. All right, so it's only in world 2 that this is false. All right, now what to do with this negation? Again, remember, we're just going to look over here and flip it. Some of you might only want to do 2 versions of this. For the long truth tables, you have to do every line. You have to do every possible world. Excuse me. You have to do every possible world because the premises relate to each other. So we've got to go through all of them, but we're just going to flip them. So let me get rid of this ugly arrow. We can see that it's true in world 1, which means not W is going to be false. We can see that it's false in world 2, which means that not W is going to be true. In world 3, we can see that it's true again, which means false. And in world 4, we can see that it's false, which means that not it is true. Okay, awesome. And now we just go and do the exact same thing for the M. All right, so we're just going to look over here and flip it. Let's get rid of that obnoxious arrow. And we're going to see that in world 1, it's true. So we're flipping it to false. Again, world 2, it's true. So we're flipping it to false. World 3, M is false. So not M is true. And in world 4, or on line 4, as some people will say, it is false again. So we know that not it is true. All right. So what again is validity? It's when all the premises are true, but the conclusion is false. Well, we have our first premise here, we have our second premise here, and we have our conclusion right here. And remember, all the premises are true and the conclusion is false at the same time is invalid. So what we want to look for is we want to find a line that has all true premises but a false conclusion. Well, world 1 has one true premise and a false conclusion right there, but that's not going to get us to invalid. Invalid is these both need to be true and this false. So this passes. World 1 is fine. We're going to look at world 2 and we're going to see that we have one false premise, but we need both premises to be true and the conclusion false for it to matter, and so our false conclusion doesn't hurt us there because we have a false premise. In world 3, again, we have a circumstance in which we have one true premise, one false, and a true conclusion, but validity doesn't say anything about that, remember? Okay, where's my cursor? Here it is. So we have a true conclusion and a false premise. Well, it doesn't say anything about that. It doesn't say anything about true conclusions with false premises. So it passes. And in fact, we can see that the only world in which both premises are true, the conclusion is also true. So it passes. This is valid. This is a valid argument. This is a lot to take in, and I understand, but we went from where we started in this class with just claims and arguments and discussions about what it means for something to be valid and what it is for something to be an argument, and we've gone all the way from this silly sentence to logical evaluation of it. This is what we've been building up for, guys. This is the real magic of philosophy, I think. And we can see really clearly here how this all pans out. Now, you're likely still struggling with this because I've only shown you validity. And what we're really looking for with truth tables is invalidity. So let's make an invalid argument. I'm not going to give you a whole sentence and make you break it down into line by line and then turn that into symbolic form. We're just going to start out with a truth table for an invalid argument. In fact, it's going to be a fallacy that we've talked about in the past. So let's pause, get a clean slate, and get ready to rock and roll with that. Okay, guys, so some of you may recognize this from the homework assignment on logical fallacies. If Congress changes marijuana from a Class 1 drug to something lesser, next year the penalties for possession will be much less than they are now. But Congress is not going to declassify marijuana anytime soon, so we will have to live with the drastic penalties for at least another year. All right, so structurally, this should look very similar to that argument we just looked at. However, we already know it's a fallacy, and it's a fallacy because it's invalid. you guys might remember this is called denying the antecedent, right? And it's called denying the antecedent because the second premise denies the first bit of the first premise. What does that mean? Well, let's write it in logical form. The great equalizer. Let's say we're going to symbolize if Congress changes marijuana from a class 1 drug to something lesser with an L, maybe? I think that's good. Next year, the penalties for possession will be much less than they are now. Let's say we're going to symbolize that with a P. The second premise negates the antecedent, so it is going to be written as not L. And our conclusion is going to be, so we'll have to live with the drastic penalties for at least another year. Where on earth is my cursor? Right there. Okay. That's one way to find it. Okay, so we'll have to live with the drastic penalties for at least another year. So we're going to infer from that not infer from that. We're going to turn that into not P because it's the negation of the second bit, the consequent of our first premise. So let's write it out in logical form that you're familiar with. Premise 1 is L arrow P. Premise 2 is not L, and our conclusion is not P. Some of you will find it helpful to write it in this form. Some of you will just be able to look at the sentences. Either is fine. All right, so we can see that this has two variables. So we know those variables are L, or sentence atoms, L and P. So we can begin making our long truth table. Whoa, my goodness. That was real crazy. I'm going to continue my trademark squiggly line. Might as well put one down this side too. Nope, that's just janky. All right, and we know that there are going to be 4 possible worlds. So I'm just going to go ahead and number those because, again, we only have 2 variables. And we're just going to fill this out. True, true, false, false. Sorry about that weird F. Nobody said that writing in Photoshop would be easy. I'm going to turn that setting off. That turns excessive pressure. Yeah, that's an F. Just trust me, guys. That's an F. Okay. And we're going to alternate true, false, true, false for our second one. Doesn't matter what order you guys put these in. What matters is that we're keeping all our possible worlds distinct. And that's why we have to go straight across. So we write our first premise, L arrow P, or L entails P. That's a weird P. Our second premise is not L, and our conclusion is therefore not P. Right? This just says the same thing as this fancy sentence up here. If Congress changes marijuana from a class 1 drug to something lesser, next year the penalties for possession will be much less than they are now. But Congress is not going to declassify marijuana anytime soon, so we will have to live with the drastic penalties for at least another year. We've just symbolized it, and we're going to analyze it now. We're going to show why it's fallacious and invalid, and it's a structural problem. You cannot draw that conclusion from those premises. So let's get down to business. I'm very excited for this one. We know that in the if L then P world, when both are true, it's true. We know, in fact, that it is only false when the antecedent occurs, but the consequent does not. In world 2, the antecedent occurs, but the consequent does not. And we can just go ahead and say, okay, we know that it's true in all those other worlds. This is why it's good to just go ahead and memorize those base truth tables that we started the lesson with. It'll become much more natural to you. And I'd go over it with the class and like let you shout out your answers and everything if coronavirus weren't ravaging the world. But I might move a little quickly because it's not fun for me to be like, I don't know, guys, what do you think? To an empty room. So again, we have the negation of L, so we're just going to flip it. So we know it's false, false, true, true. And then we've got our conclusion, which maybe we want to separate with another squiggly line. I don't know. Do it, don't do it, whatever. It's a negation of P. So again, we're just going to flip whatever P is over here, which means it's going to be false, true, false, true. All right. Excellent. Now, what is invalid? Invalid is true premises, all true premises, and a false conclusion. Some of you might have been intuiting something we can do here. I'm going to take the red color for a minute. If we're only concerned with all true premises, any of these that have false premises, we don't need to worry about. We can just go ahead and stop doing them. Those don't count. Those won't get us to it, right? Because invalid is true premises and a false conclusion. So you can just go ahead and get rid of those guys. World 1 and World 2, we don't care about you for validity. Get out of here. Now suddenly this is much easier to look at. Maybe. It's certainly a lot more metal. Okay, so we have worlds that have true premises. Let's see if any of them yield a false conclusion. Yes, they do. Invalid is true premises with a false conclusion. This does not pass. It would pass here. World 4 is fine. But what this means is that there's a world in which all these premises, Congress changes where if Congress changes marijuana from a class 1 drug to something lesser, next year the penalties for possession will be much less than they are now. Okay, there's a world in which that's true. But Congress is not going to declassify marijuana anytime soon. There's a world in which that is also true, and yet the conclusion is not true. That means you cannot reliably come to this conclusion, so we'll have to live with the drastic penalties for at least another year based on that argument, based on those premises. This is the true meaning of invalid. This is a bad argument. This is why that argument is fallacious. Your homework will at sometimes ask you to circle the row or the line that makes an argument invalid. If you end up numbering them, you can just say line 3. So invalid. Right? Because this is a world in which you have true premises that do not lead to that conclusion. That's the world in which I don't know, maybe just states on their own change the drastic penalties or something like that. I'm not very imaginative, certainly not when sitting at home alone like this. But the point is, this logic, it's not uncoupled from actual arguments or real world situations. Some of you really struggled with identifying denying the antecedent fallacy. Well, here it is written out. This is why it doesn't work. This is the proof that it is fallacious reasoning, that you cannot use this kind of reasoning to come to that conclusion. And this is what it's really powerful for. Some of you may also be noticing that, like I said, we can scratch out lines 1 and lines 2 because they have false premises, and our claim about validity only has to do with true premises. And then you can immediately jump over here and see this false. We were looking for the false, which means we were trying to do something different. This confuses a lot of students because they think that we're looking for something with validity, but with validity, every line just passes. These lines would have automatically passed up here because they have a false premise, and our claim about validity says nothing about false premises. So it only says something about true premises combined with a false conclusion. What we are trying to do is effectively, we're looking for that combination because it's much easier to prove something invalid than it is valid. If we set out trying to prove something valid, then we have to go through every line because every line is okay. If we set out looking for the false, looking for the unique combination of true premises with a false conclusion, if we try to falsify the argument, then we know exactly what we're looking for, and we can say exactly what lines we're interested in, and we can look for this unique combination. If you intuitively saw that, or if you're starting to get a feel for this, the next thing you might be thinking is, there's a shorter way to do this. And it's true, there's a shorter way to do this. It's the next level of logical reasoning. It doesn't involve numbering out these lines and whatnot, and it will be the subject of our next lecture. So,